I'm the wrong hero, presenting my high energy, smoking in the groove, don't quit your day job presentation entitled The Wrong Hero, Rock and Roll A to Z. This is a new phase Wrong Hero album, and like I said only seconds ago, but you weren't listening, it's titled Rock and Roll A to Z. After you've heard my presentation of, do I have to say it again? Rock and Roll A to Z, you won't wonder why the wrong hero wears the mask anymore. And now, for the fourth and I hope final time, I present Rock and Roll A to Z. Let's see. Since we're doing Rock and Roll A to Z, I guess it's only logical to start with ABBA. ABBA. It means Father. That's what Christ said when he was being crucified. And no wonder. You ever hear these people? ABBA. Where do they come from? Venus? With band members with names like Agnetha Faltskog? You really have to wonder. Now let's see, as long as we're still in the A range. AC/DC. Make up your mind! Aerosmith. Aerosmith. Obviously a pseudonym. What are they trying to hide, other than an obvious lack of finesse? They have that hit, Walk This Way. Yeah, said the spider to the fly, walk this way into a land of soulless degeneracy is more like it. And the Allman Brothers. The Allman Brothers. All I ever heard all through the 1970s was that song they did, Tied to the Whipping Post. But I got a smile out of thinking about how much I'd like to tie them to the whipping post, and my lash hand would not grow tired anytime soon, I can assure you. And G.G. Allin, may he rest in peace. G.G. Allin. When even the police finally got bored with his crimes, G.G. Allin decided it was time to die. And now we have America. America. They had that hit, Horse with No Name, which is appropriate since they sounded so stupid it made you wonder whether they even knew their own name. Or were they too busy drooling into a bong? And since when do horses need names anyway? What are they going to do? Take it to a party and introduce it to Joe Camel? America. Puh. And now, my impression of Laurie Anderson. Hi, I'm Laurie Anderson. I'm Laurie Anderson. And now we come to the Animals. The Animals with We Gotta Get Out of This Place. I heard that song so many times I felt like saying, go then already. Get as far away from this place as possible, but leave me alone. And then there was the Archies. The Archies. You know, at least the monkeys were real people who acted like they were in a cartoon. The Archies were cartoon characters from the 1940s who cashed in on the soft-core bubblegum psychedelia phase and had the #1 song. And they got the idea of a candy girl from the Four Seasons, no less. Boy, talk about robbing the grave. Ha! Boy, how low can you go, huh? And then we come to Argent. Argent. Well, since the Zombies were so great, it stands to reason that the least talented member of the Zombies would be the one who hits it big in the United States now. Doesn't it? And the Association. Who could forget hits like, cherish is a word I use to describe you? The Association, proof positive that it is possible to establish guilt by association. And now we come to the Average White Band. One of them sniffed heroin from a dish at a party, thinking it was cocaine. Don't you hate it when that happens? Boy, I'll tell you, I go to these parties all the time. I just hate it when that happens. And then we come to Bad Company, in the B range of rock and roll A to Z. Bad Company, another case of guilt by association. And then there's Bachman-Turner Overdrive. You ain't seen nothing yet. Yeah, that's right. We ain't seen nothing as low as a bunch of Canadians ripping off Baba O'Reilly by Pete Townsend and throwing in Roger Daltrey's Stutter from My Generation to boot. And then there was Badfinger. Now, this is very important for me to establish right at the start. Anybody who has anything to do with Paul McCartney generally finds their career going straight down the toilet. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but think Michael Jackson, Mary Hopkin, and Elvis Costello, okay? Just for examples. And of course, the biggest example of this is Badfinger. Badfinger. I think maybe they should have called themselves Stinkfinger. It would have given a whole new dimension to that song of theirs. If you want it, here it is, come and get it. And now, of course, that classic band called simply The Band. The Band is principally remembered for having melodies as imaginative as their name. And of course, for having the only guy more tuneless than Levon Helm on vocals for a while, namely, you guessed it, Bob Dylan. But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. He's coming up. And now we got the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys. How many of them were there? 4, 5, 6? Who can tell? They were all so fat, nobody could tell. Brian Wilson was deaf in one ear and tone deaf in the other. And they called themselves the Beach Boys. And they couldn't surf. They couldn't even swim if Dennis Wilson is any indication. And now the Wrong Hero presents this word for Brian Wilson's Instant Coffee. Tired of spooning 3 or 4 tablespoons of instant coffee into your hot water? Try Brian's Blend. 1 teaspoon has enough caffeine to keep you going for weeks. It's Brian Wilson's Instant Coffee. And now, of course, we come to the Beatles. Well, nowadays there's all this talk about who should be the 4th Beatle. Well, I think I should be the 4th Beatle because, of course, I was in a band called the Street Beatles. You might remember us. We were the homeless people who did all those Beatles covers in Harvard Square. Let's see, we had I Wanna Hold Your Purse, and backed with A Taste of Vomit, tasting much sweeter than bile, doo-doo-doo. Anyway, the Beatles. John Lennon. I used to be mean to my woman and my auntie and me manager and everybody else. John Lennon. He shoplifted from area stores. He kicked Stu Sutcliffe in the head and gave him a brain tumor, his best friend, and he murdered him. I'd hate to see how he treated his enemies. And this is the man they worship. John Lennon. He married this horrible chain-smoking Sarah Lawrence graduate who couldn't sing, or even talk, or even breathe. Next we have Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney. What good is he? He's pudgy. He married a horrible groupie, also from Sarah Lawrence. And every time I see his sad-looking, big, black, googly Walter Keane eyes, I'd like to pop him with a pin. Paul McCartney. And then there was George Harrison. George Harrison. He stole My Sweet Lord from the Chiffons. I have all of George Harrison's records. Do I hear $2? $1.50? $1? 50 cents? 25 cents? You'll take them for free? You're evil. Evil! And then we come to Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr. He's okay. A good drummer is hard to find. I also hear he's pretty good at cutting hair too, although if you look at the Beatles, you wouldn't be able to tell. Of course, we all know that Klaus Vormann's girlfriend cut their hair in that famous Beatles style. Well, next on the menu is Beat Happening. Beat Happening. They're on K Records. And Superman won't have anything to do with them. And neither will anybody else, for that matter. So much for Beat Happening. Of course, you might guess that now we come to the Bee Gees. America's most popular band, the Bee Gees. Well, here's a song for the Bee Gees. Stay, 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 stay dead, stay dead. Thank you. Tony Bennett. Now, he's not a rock and roll musician, but you know, you got to throw in some stuff that isn't really, strictly speaking, rock and roll, just to sort of balance things out a little bit, you know? Tony Bennett, he had that big hit about how he left his heart in San Francisco, which is funny, you know, because that's where I left most of my sanity, to tell you the truth. Now, isn't it funny how nobody appreciated Tony Bennett until Dean Martin got Alzheimer's disease and Frank Sinatra started forgetting the words to his songs? And all of a sudden, it's Tony Bennett, Tony Bennett, Tony Bennett, everywhere you go, Tony Bennett. Better we should talk about Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry. No presentation of rock and roll stars would be complete without at least mentioning Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry, America's poet laureate and ambassador to outer space, responsible for coining such words as motivating and popularizing advanced concepts like my ding-a-ling. Now, this man is as close as we'll ever get to William Shakespeare, at least in this century. What else can you say about the man who is directly responsible for the Beach Boys? Well, I wasn't sure where to put this next band, so I just stuck them right after Chuck Berry, just to compound the agony. The B-52s. The B-52s. Is this music or some sort of elaborate torture devised by Yoko Ono to punish us for not buying her albums? This is what I need to know. Next on the menu is Big Country. Yeah, it's a big country, all right, but not big enough for both of us. So perhaps it's fortunate that we no longer hear very much from Big Country. Blondie. Blondie. What an avant-garde touch to use the expression pain in the ass on Top 40 radio. No wonder she was on the cutting edge of the 70s pop, underground, new wave, disco, rock and roll boom, huh? I'll tell you. Now we have Blood, Sweat and Tears. Blood, Sweat and Tears had nothing to offer but blood, sweat and tears. And with this in mind, I wouldn't blame you if you chose to take your dinner elsewhere. Now we come to Blue Cheer. Blue Cheer. How's come if they were named after LSD, their music was one long bad trip? And next comes the Blues Brothers. I know a bunch of cigarette-smoking cartoon camels who have more soul than these guys ever had. Let's face it, the California Raisins have more soul than the Blues Brothers. Hey, at least the Archies had their own comic book, and they didn't go around ripping off Otis Redding and Sam and Dave now. Well, and directly following the Blues Brothers is, of course, the inimitable David Bowie. Is there anyone David Bowie hasn't slept with? He slept with Angela Bowie. Even worse, he slept with Mick Jagger. Who else did he sleep with? Eno? Margaret Thatcher? Hitler? Well, Iggy Pop. Close. Well, now this brings us to Bread. They sang, I would give anything I own. I'd give up my life, my heart, my soul. Well, if anybody comes around here playing Bread, part one of that introspective triad will certainly be operative. Brenda and the Tabulations. Now here's a super obscure one. I'm not even sure I know who they are. Now how did they come up with this name? Brenda and the Tabulations. My guess is a bunch of fat cat record executives were sitting around saying, let's see, what do we call this band? I don't know. Whatever we like, the kids can't stand. Well, let's name them after the one thing we hate the most. I know, tabulating. We'll call them Brenda and the Tabulations. Isn't that wonderful? Here's another band that isn't strictly speaking rock and roll, but is only introduced as a contrast, the Brothers Four. I never cared for them much as musicians, but their funny-looking crew cuts were always good for a laugh. Let's see now. Getting back to where we were, James Brown. Now, judging from the way James Brown got thrown into prison after going on a rampage, when he sang, I feel good, he wasn't just kidding around, I guess. Oh, and there's Jackson Brown. Jackson Brown. Now, when he sang Running on Empty, he must have really touched the hearts and minds of his followers. Especially their minds. Oh, and Brownsville Station. Brownsville Station. I guess I shouldn't be too hard on them, especially since their masterpiece, Smokin' in the Boys' Room, was about as soulful and literate as rock and roll ever got in the 1970s. And now we come to Buffalo Springfield. Let's see, they were named after a tractor, and one of them later got famous, and that's about all anybody remembers about them, if they even remember that. Oh, and the Buzzcocks. Now, if the Buzzcocks had had a more conventional name, they might have gotten the recognition they truly deserved. But there's a lot to be said for forming a cult band with a name so ugly that it scares off the tourists. And who knows, maybe someday Orgasm Addict will be the elevator music of our generation, if things loosen up. And now we have the Byrds. The Byrds. The Byrds. Well, I had a girlfriend in college who hated that song, Chestnut Mare. Especially the part about, I'm gonna catch that horse if I can, and when I do, gonna give her my brand. Wouldn't you know it, after we broke up, she went out and got herself a tattoo. Here's another person we throw in for the purposes of contrast. Glenn Campbell. Glenn Campbell, thrown out of the Beach Boys after 3 weeks. What a distinction! A distinction he shares with Daryl Dragon, the captain of The Captain and Tennille. Truly, it has been said that Wichita Lineman is one of the most nightmarish songs ever written. In fact, right up there with Muskrat Love and Be True to Your School. Now to interject a note of modernity into this proceeding, Camper Van Beethoven. They had that wonderful song, Take the Skinheads Bowling, which reminds me that one nice thing about skinheads is they don't leave hair on the soap. Also, instead of wasting hours trying on dozens of pairs of shoes, they just grab the Doc Martens and they're out of there. And that's what I like about skinheads. Canned Heat. Now, I don't know why they call themselves Canned Heat. Al Wilson's high-pitched voice has been known to extinguish campfires from 100 yards away, so you think they'd call themselves something slightly different than Canned Heat. Maybe because their fans were mostly people who resorted to drinking canned heat when it was Sunday and they couldn't go to liquor stores. Who knows? One of my favorite bands, Cannibal and the Headhunters. And in tribute to these fine gentlemen, I'd like to sing Land of a Thousand Dances. But we are rather short on time, so we only have time for the short version. Do you know how to pony now? No, get you, yeah, get you, ooh. The Capitals. The Capitals. You know, they had that song Cool Jerk, and with lyrics like, come on babe and really do the cool jerk, it's no wonder these fellers were the toast of sophisticated trendsetters the world over. And now we come to The Captain and Tennille. Just think, if The Captain and Tennille had never written Love Will Keep Us Together, Joy Division might not ever have been inspired to write Love Will Tear Us Apart. Now, we've got to take our inspiration from wherever we can find it, I guess, is the lesson for us all. Next up is Captain Beefheart. Now, any man who didn't have much use for Frank Zappa can't be all bad. Besides, Frank Sinatra sang shoo-be-doo-be-doo-dee-boo-dee-boo-dee, and Captain Beefheart wrote an answer song which went, "Who-a-dart, who-a-day." So you gotta give him credit. He was ahead of the curve. Eric Carmen. His only real hit was All By Myself, an eerie portent of his future without the raspberries, I reckon. And now the Carpenters. I wish someone would have driven a nail into the Carpenters when there was still time. Now we'll never stop hearing their music on every easy listening station and in every dentist's waiting room in the land. Drive a nail in them and do it upright, is my advice for coping with the Carpenters. Well, that leads directly to our next band, the Cars. Boston's own the Cars. That air-fluffed pneumatic voice that their lead singer had was enough to make me want to ride a bicycle for 20 years. Why didn't somebody run them over? Maybe a band called the Trucks, or Royal Trucks for that matter, who we won't get to in this presentation, I'm sorry to say. Johnny Cash. I'll say one thing for Johnny Cash. You got to give him credit at 7.9%, which is only a few points above the prime rate. I wrote an updated version of A Boy Named Sue. It's a sensitive, introspective ballad entitled A Boy Named Sue, per man. Now all the kids around town, they taunted me because, and if you want to name your kid something, name them anything but, like Batman or Aquaman or the Flash or the Hulk, but anything but Sue, per man. That's all I got right now, sorry. David Cassidy. I'll say one thing about that annoying David Cassidy. He's the prototype for that annoyingly complacent Fred Savage kid on The Wonder Years, and for that, he can never be forgiven. Now we come to the Chambers Brothers. Their biggest hit was Time Has Come Today, and by the time the song was over, today had probably come and gone. I suspect the Chambers that the Chambers Brothers were named after were the refillable chambers of the world's biggest hookah, bong, or hubbly bubbly from the sound of their presentations. Now we have Gene Chandler. Gene Chandler had that song Duke of Earl, which, when you think of it, could have spawned all sorts of follow-ups like Bwana of Mufti, or Chief of Boss, or High Priest of Archbishop. But it wouldn't be quite the same if he sang Chief, 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 Chief of Boss, 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 Chief of Boss, Boss, Boss. Now would it? Harry Chapin. I guess you'd have to call him the poor man's Phil Oakes. Except I know from personal experience that you could actually hold a coherent conversation with Harry Chapin. I remember one time when I was a teenager, Harry Chapin did a concert and he had a little question and answer session at the end. And I remember I raised my hand and said, "How's come when there's people starving that folks put fertilizers on their lawns?" And Harry, to his credit, said, "That's a very good question." Hey, how come people still do that anyway, huh? Not that I care. I got mine. Now we got Ray Charles. Now, who do you suppose put those syringes in the Diet Pepsi cans? Obviously, it was Ray Charles. Here's why. He's a former junkie, he's blind, and he has the keys to the Diet Pepsi warehouse. Now, that gives a whole new meaning to, "You got the right one, baby." Doesn't it now? Now we're coming up to Cheap Trick. Now, I got a copy of Cheap Trick live at Budokan for $0.25. And that was a pretty cheap trick. And I guess that was also a pretty cheap shot, too. Hey, they can't all be gems. Chubby Checker. Now, there's an interesting story about Chubby Checker. The wife of the man who ran the Cameo Parkway label gave Chubby Checker his name as a homage to Fats Domino. Now, if she had been a little bit more highbrow, she might have called him Obese Chess, or maybe Arteriosclerotic Backgammon, or Oleaginous Bingo. But no, Chubby Checker was his name. Now our next person is only marginally involved in the rock and roll scene, and that of course is Cher. Now I hear Cher had 2 of her ribs taken out so she'd be even thinner than she already is. Which is great because now when she stands with her arms akimbo, she can shake hands with her own lower intestine. Now, that's what I call living life in the fast lane. Now Chicago. Chicago had that song, "When I was walking down the street one day." Now if I ever catch them walking down my street, that'll be the last street they ever walk down one day. I'll tell you that. Now, Eric Clapton. First they called him God. Then they called him Derek and the Dominoes. Then they called him Slow Hand. Even Lucifer didn't fall that far in such a short time. And at least the devil never appeared on MTV Unplugged. Duets with Charlie Daniels is about as low as even Satan is willing to go to capture new souls for hell. Now we're talking about The Clash. I hear when Phil Oakes was strangled in Africa and lost most of his singing range, he became so despondent he committed suicide. Now if only he had hung in there for a few years, he might have taken heart at the example of Joe Strummer, who managed to have a hit single with only the tiniest fraction of an octave. Now we have George Clinton. I still think Bill Clinton should have picked George Clinton as his running mate. Then we'd really have One Nation Under a Groove getting down just for the funk of it now, wouldn't we? Not sure that George Clinton would make a very good president, though. Joe Cocker. I once saw him do that Stevie Wonder song, "You are so beautiful, too." And when he went to hit the high note, his head exploded. I wonder if he got paid extra for that trick. Dennis Coffey and the Detroit Guitar Band. How soon we forget. Of course, I don't need coffee. I already have a bitter taste in my mouth first thing in the morning. Leonard Cohen. So what if he can't sing? Now here's an amusing anecdote based on true experience. One time I played his song, "Don't Go Home With Your Heart On," and I got thrown out of radio station WDOM. And this is a true story. Alice Cooper. I ever used to hang out with Bob Hope and John Wayne and people of that ilk and play beer and golf, only they insisted on calling him Vince because they felt funny about calling him by a girl's name. And Elvis Costello. No matter how well he's doing now, his career will never fully recover from his having referred to Ray Charles with the N-word. Also, didn't he rip off Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues back when everybody was too confused by drug abuse to notice it? And worst of all, he sang a song co-written by Paul McCartney, which is the kiss of death if you examine the careers of Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, John Lennon, and Badfinger, who also made the same fatal mistake. And Country Joe and the Fish. Many of you might not remember Country Joe. When I heard the Vietnam War was over, my first reaction was, "Oh no, poor Country Joe and the Fish. What are they going to sing about now?" And here we go, The Cramps. I'd like to do a movie which crosses the Beverly Hillbillies with Night of the Living Dead, and the soundtrack could be by The Cramps. Now this is the story of a man named Jed, a poor mountaineer. Now he's one of the living dead! And The Crass. Now I don't know if you've ever heard of The Crass, and I don't know much about them either, but you've got to love any band whose sole rationale was to point out what a bunch of schmucks The Clash really were. And Cream. as we finish the first quarter of our presentation. Cream rises. Newsflash, so does Scum. They had that album called Goodbye. I say goodbye and good riddance. Next, we have Creedence Clearwater Revival. I prefer to refer to them by their nickname, Creedence Bongwater Revival. Oh, and John Fogerty. He sings, "Put me in, coach, I'm ready to play." I'll tell you what, try writing a song that doesn't sound like Creedence, okay? Then maybe we'll put you in. Jim Croce. Now, English philosopher Mick Jagger says, "Time is on my side." But American philosopher Jim Croce states that there never seems to be enough time in his introspective song, Time in a Bottle. Well, I put time in a bottle, but it got all stale and moldy and it stank up my refrigerator. Now I can't even get the 5 cents deposit back. By the way, I wrote an answer song to Bad, Bad Leroy Brown. It was called Good, Good Christopher White Never Got in a Razor Fight, just to balance things out a little. And now we have Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I like to call them BFWH. Boring, fat, whiny hippies. Because that's what they are. Ah, and The Cure. I gave my girlfriend a Cure record for Christmas. And for my birthday, she gave me a disease. Oh, and The Circle, or is it The Kirkle? They did Red Rubber Ball, co-written by Paul Simon. And when you can't get a hit without the help of that shrimp, you're definitely one hurtin' puppy. Oh, and did I mention that their manager was Brian Epstein? The Dave Clark 5. The Dave Clark 5 is finally out in CD. Now I suppose Dave Clark has no excuse if the Tottenham Sound fails to sweep the planet. Tony Orlando and Dawn. Knock 3 times. Every time I heard that song, I used to have a little smile on my face because I would pretend I was smashing their record. Oh, and Tie a Yellow Ribbon. That's a song about convicts. What does that say about our servicemen, that Tie a Yellow Ribbon is their official anthem? Oh, and that song, Candida. Black kids used to beat me up for listening to that song, and, well, I thank them for it now. Now we're talking about Joey D and the Starlighters. Now, if rock and roll is so progressive, how's come nobody's ever managed to come up with a better song than the Peppermint Twist, which came out back in 1961? Huh? Oh, and John Denver. You must remember him, Mr. Thank God I'm a Country Boy, better known perhaps as Mr. I hoard gasoline during an oil crisis, and Mr. I offer the Russians $1 million to let me orbit in outer space. You know, if the Russians had taken him up on that offer and then let him come back, we'd have a lot to be thankful for from the Russians. Hell, make them the 51st state if they do that. Deep Purple. I hope there's a section of hell awaiting these gentlemen, which features the very same smoke on the water and fire in the sky they sang about with such nauseating vigor back when I was too helpless to do anything about it. Oh, and the Drifters. Remember the Drifters? They had that song in those ads for Radio Free Europe. You know, they had this guy singing in front of this shortwave radio going on Broadway. Guess you have to be a certain age to remember that. Oh, and Devo. Now, if Devo believed so firmly in the theory of devolution, then how's come they sounded so much like robots? And if they really were unevolved, how's come they only had one top 40 hit? Huh? Neil Diamond. Oh, he sang, I am, I said, and I sang, shut up, play dead. Let's face it, Neil Diamond is basically Frank Sinatra for burned out hippies, isn't he? And the Dixie Cups. Now the Dixie Cups were a great band. It's a shame their reputation turned out to be every bit as disposable as their name. Fats Domino. Now Fats Domino sang, I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill. I guess if I weighed 300 pounds and stumbled across a hill made entirely of blueberries, I'd get a pretty large charge out of that myself. Oh, and Donovan. He had the distinction of being the next Bob Dylan before anybody had even noticed that the first one wasn't quite all there anymore. Now the Doobie Brothers. They had that annoying song, Listen to the Music, and after massive exposure to their opus a la dopus, that's about all you're fit to do. And then there's the Doors. Jim Morrison was a Navy brat who got fat from drinking cheap red wine and who wrote bad poetry and who died of a drug overdose in the bathtub. That was probably the first bath that man ever took. It wasn't the drugs, it was the shock of cleanliness that did him in. Now I have a feeling Jim Morrison would have lived to be about 90 years old if he had sung Irish music. You know, like, oh, the time to hesitate is through, no time to wallow in the mire, and if you're not careful I will light your head on fire. Oh, you know, like that. The Dream Syndicate. Now, judging from the subject matter of their songs, they were actually more like the Nightmare Syndicate. Now, I know that's lame, but at least I've demonstrated that I'm familiar with the Dream Syndicate. Now, that should give me some brownie points. Oh, and Dr. John. Dr. John was so bizarre, he made Screaming Jay Hawkins look like Donny Osmond. Okay? Just for the record. Oh, and Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan. He's mean, he's lazy, he taught the Beatles how to smoke marijuana, and those are his good qualities. And he'd be singing these annoying songs like, what kind of world is this in when poets ain't got a pot to piss in and avatars make more than movie stars and there's fighting on the plane of jars and we happen to be winning. Down, 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 down. The Eagles. I thought the Eagles were an endangered species, but I guess you wouldn't know it from listening to the radio, especially back in 1970. Oh, Electric Light Orchestra. Now, whenever I pride myself on my superior taste, I think back to how at one time I owned every single one of the Electric Light Orchestra's albums, and instantly I am humbled. Oh, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. What a brilliant idea, combining classical music and rock and making both rock stars and classical music fans both despise you in the bargain. ELP. Really, their name was ELP as in ELP, ELP. Stop them! And the Everly Brothers. They had to have Roy Orbison to write Claudette, which was probably their best song, and it's no wonder they had such a hard time waking up little Susie if she had been listening to their records. Fairport Convention. You know, Richard and Linda Thompson made a career out of writing songs every bit as oppressive as the injustices they were attempting to eradicate. Now that's what gets me about them. Oh, Marianne Faithfull. After the Rolling Stones got itchy trigger fingers once they polished off Brian Jones, I guess they destroyed Marianne Faithfull just to keep in practice. Oh, the Feelies. Their music was great, but what I remember most about them is they snubbed my girlfriend and they wouldn't share their marijuana. So keep that in mind next time you go backstage to meet the Feelies. Where do you suppose they got those crazy rhythms? Fleetwood Mac. A soap opera for potheads, as the wart glitters. Foghat. The only thing that was more incomprehensible than their name was their appeal. Jane Fonda. Now, didn't she play a prostitute in the movie Clute? Now, for her, maybe it wasn't much of a stretch. Oh, here's our exercise record. I think I'll keep it. Foreigner. Foreigner. That band was the most convincing argument yet for stricter immigration laws. The Forgotten Rebels. Canadian punk rock. What a concept. Now, they had all those big hits like Elvis is Dead and To Hell with the Beatles Reunion, and of course, who could forget Surfing on Heroin? A sterling example for our nation's youth. And the Four Seasons. Now, if you name your band after Vivaldi, I guess people will think that you're somehow more highbrow than you actually are. Now, to me, the four seasons are winter, spring, summer, and fall and break your neck four seasons. They were sort of like the Beatles for greasers. You know, greasers, people whose necks weren't red enough to worship Elvis. So they were greasers. Frankie Valli, his voice kept getting higher and higher, and he had to keep on upping the ante till he got to the point where dogs were running in the streets howling in pain. Then he went solo and did songs like Going Out of My Head, and believe me, every time I hear that song I know the feeling. Michael Franks. Now he's not really a rock and roll star either. May I suggest that when the day of judgment comes, the sheep will be separated from the goats on the basis of whether the newly deceased had ever admitted to liking the song Popsicle Toes? And the guy whose idea it was to have Michael Franks open for Miles Davis will probably burn in the hottest part of hell, if there is any justice in the afterworld. The Friends of Distinction. Now, if the Friends of Distinction really were the Friends of Distinction, how's come nobody knows who they are anymore? Now, that's food for thought. Oh, and Genesis. How's come the only hits Genesis ever had came right after Peter Gabriel left the band? Now, there's more food for thought. Oh, and then there's that Phil Collins. He had that hit, Against All Odds, where he sang, "Take a look at me now." No! No thanks. You ever see this guy? He makes Elton John look like Mr. Universe. And when you go to a Genesis concert and you see a 60-foot head on a video screen, you think, if aliens ever invaded this planet, that would be enough to drive them away for all time. Now, let's see. Generation X. Generation X gave us the solo career of Billy Idol. And of course, for that, they can never be forgiven. Dancing with myself. Jerry and the Pacemakers. Now, there's a sort of poetic justice to their name, since they're all old enough to be wearing pacemakers by now, I reckon. Oh, the Gods. The Gods, you know, the 60s Gods. Surely you're familiar with the Gods from the 1960s on the prestigious ESP label. They had all those underground hits like na 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 and Traveling Salesman, Traveling Salesman. No, you don't remember them? Well, think of them this way. They were sort of the Sebadoh of their day. Oh, the Go-Go's. Their first hit was Our Lips Are Sealed. Would that it had remained so. But at least now the Go-Go's are finally gone, gone. Let's hope for good, good. Ah, Leslie Gore. Now, Dr. Kevorkian's forming his own political party, and I believe they're going to get Leslie Gore to write the campaign slogan. It's my party and I'll die if I want to. Backed with, and now it's Judy's turn to die, Judy's turn to die. Oh, and sunshine, lollipops, and carbon monoxide poisoning. Grand Funk Railroad. Now, all that time they were singing, "We're an American band, we're coming to your town." I was saying, "Where's my passport? Where's my passport?" It was almost enough to make you want to renounce your citizenship altogether. Ah, the Grateful Dead. Dr. Kevorkian's going on tour with the Grateful Dead. They're going to do Touch of Grey and the showstopper, Please Don't Ease Me In. I wrote a song in honor of the Grateful Dead. They're coming to your town in a psychedelic gown, and if they had a brain, they'd play with it. Their songs are kind of long, and the singing's none too strong. I like the Grateful Dead because they don't do shit. I like to go to Grateful Dead concerts. I like the feeling of community, the quaint hippie costumes worn by people who were born 10 years after the Summer of Love, and the fact that the police surveillance helicopters hovering overhead make it impossible to hear what those old men on stage are saying. Can you imagine going to a Grateful Dead concert and tripping on LSD? And there's these police copters overhead, trucking, down to New Orleans. Whoop, 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 whoop. Voices green and purple. Ah! Next we have Gun Club, a compelling argument for the Brady Bill. Oh, and Guns N' Roses. They put a song on one of their albums that was written by Charlie Manson. That's a neat trick. Too bad the Beach Boys thought of it 25 years ago. Well, me, I say anybody can write one good LP, but I'm waiting for Charlie Manson's second album. Oh, and Bill Haley and the Comets. No discussion would be complete without Bill Haley and the Comets. It's funny how America's biggest teen idol in the mid-1950s was a moon-faced, spit-curled moron. Of course, who could have predicted 20 years later that Elton John would be the hottest thing to come down the pike since sliced bread? Oh, and Heart. Heart, the Wilson sisters. If I have to listen to Crazy on You one more time, I'll throw a nutty like you've never seen and show them the real meaning of Crazy on You. Now, if the lower class had two throats, they would belong to the Wilson sisters. Jimi Hendrix, a washed-up session musician from Seattle who, once he moves to London, puts on a psychedelic clown outfit and wears bandanas impregnated with LSD, all of a sudden ascends to Godhead and dies. Now, there's a lesson in this somewhere. Oh, Herman's Hermits. Would they had lived up to their names and remained hermits, then I wouldn't have to forget, Mrs. Brown, you've got a lovely daughter. Dan Hicks and his hot licks. In my experience, only Hicks, like Dan Hicks, thought those warmed-over hokum jazz licks were particularly hot. Oh, and the Hollies. The Hollies were great. But when they did that album of Dylan covers, back when even Dylan didn't want to sing Dylan songs, that pretty much destroyed any credibility that they ever had, even with their own band members. But, you know, their version of A Taste of Honey is much better than the Beatles' version. Gotta give them that. Buddy Holly, one of the fathers of rock and roll, who proved that rock and roll is capitalism in 1-4-5. Consume, 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 fornicate, fornicate, die, 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 die. Oh, and Mary Hopkin, another person touched by the Paul McCartney curse. Once this happened, nobody ever heard from her again. It's powerful stuff. Remember Mike McGear? Hot chocolate. Too bad they didn't have any marshmallows, or maybe they'd still be around today, huh? The Human League. All I can say is, don't play their music around your pets, or somebody might call the Animal League, the Animal Rescue League. Husker Du. Husker Du means, do you remember? But about the only thing most people seem to remember is they copied those little dots over their vowels from Blue Oyster Cult. Ian and Sylvia. Well, Ian Tyson had a hit with 7 albums worth of cowboy ballads, and that's just great, a Canadian cowboy. What had he heard? Polar bears? But whatever happened to Sylvia Tyson? Maybe she should do a duet of crummy show tunes with her fellow countrywoman, Anne Murray. Janice Ian. She did that song at 17 when she was 24. Maybe when she turns 42, she'll have a hit with At 71. The Jackson 5. Haven't we finally had enough of this nauseating clan? The sister poses nude in men's magazines, but at least she gets a whole bunch of money for acting kinky, instead of having to give a whole bunch of money away for acting kinky. The Jam. You know, the Jam's one of my favorites. I can't really think of anything bad to say about the Jam,
But that's counterbalanced by the fact that I can't really think of anything good to say about the follow-up band, Style Council. Though Paul Weller seems to have emerged from that debacle relatively unscathed. Rick James. Now, during his trial, Rick James said to the judge in his defense, "I don't abuse women. I only abuse drugs." Now, I'm going to have to try that novel excuse the next time I get pulled over for speeding. Jan and Dean. Now, these guys made the Beach Boys look like Bill Shakespeare with lyrics like bum de dum de dum bip 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 pop up up ding 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 dong. Oh, and songs like "The Joker is Wild" and "Evil Plot to Blow Up Batman." And who could forget the Anaheim, Azusa, and Cucamonga Sewing Circle Book Review and Timing Association. Jay and the Americans. They had that song, "She Cried." And when I told her I didn't love her anymore, she cried. Man, that woman must cry at the drop of a hat if she falls apart just because the despicable Jay and the Americans blew her off. Oh, Jefferson Airplane. Now here's a band that didn't have a hit for 8 years. Then they changed their name to Jefferson Starship, and they had the nerve to write a song called "If Only You Believe in Miracles," which went to number 3, which was pretty miraculous in and of itself. Jethro Tull. Sure, their frontman Ian Anderson has a lot of sympathy for the down and out. Oh, you know, Aqualung and all that. And it's really swell the way he pays his band members the bare minimum he can get away with. Sort of makes them more self-reliant if they don't get an equal split of the ticket receipts and royalties now, doesn't it? Billy Joel. Billy Joel is Harry Chapin with all the conscience leached out. He's sort of like Billy Crystal in black leather. Elton John. He sings, "Philadelphia Freedom left me knee-high to a man." Well, it seems to me that Philadelphia Freedom isn't the only thing that leaves Elton John knee-high to a man. Oh, and Your Song. Who could forget these immortal lyrics? "If I were a sculptor, but then again, no. If I could write lyrics, but then again, no." Elton John, a balding gnome who plays the piano with his feet, and he's worth millions. "I'll play chopsticks on your face with my hobnailed boots. Now, give me $1 million. How stupid were you people in the 70s? There you were, off worshipping this bald, pudgy, Liberace-worshipping, moon-faced moron. Now we have Grace Jones. Now, not strictly a rock and roll performer. Now, say what you will about Grace Jones, you have to respect somebody who can appreciate a good cigar. Oh, and Ricky Lee Jones. "Chuck E.'s in love." Chuck E. who? Chuck E. Cheese? Janis Joplin. Just think, if Chris Christopherson hadn't written Me and Bobby McGee, Janis Joplin wouldn't have even had one top 40 hit. I'll tell you. And Big Brother and the Holding Company. Boy, oh boy. What a stellar career they had, huh? Oh, Kansas. They had that song, "Dust in the Wind." Dust in the wind, all we are is dust in the wind. Well, all I can say to that is, blow back to Topeka with all the other cowboys who can roll a cigarette with one hand and shoot a man just to watch him die with the other. Casey Kasem. Now here's an important figure in the history of rock and roll. Casey Kasem, a DJ with a voice that could peel paint. Casey Kasem could trivialize anything. "Hi, this is Casey Kasem, live at the Crucifixion. I have here a letter from a listener. Dear Casey, my Judas is a good boy. Don't listen to anything they say about him. Signed, Mrs. Iscariot." Well, it's on the 3rd day, a big hit for ELO. Jesus' career is being resurrected. The tomb is empty. And now, here's the Rolling Stones with is only rock and roll, and I like it, on American Top 40. KC and the Sunshine Band. Now, I don't know why they named themselves after LSD when everyone I ever knew who liked them was heavy into Quaaludes. Now, what do you think Get Down Tonight was really about? Get down, get down, get down, get down, get down tonight. Ooh. Carole King. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel my stomach heaving, stomach heaving. The Kingsmen. Now, people always talk about how you can't figure out the lyrics to Louie Louie. But take it from me, once you do figure them out, you're kind of sorry you ever made the effort. Me sail a boat across the sea. Cerebral stuff, man. Speaking of cerebral, the Kinks. Now, the Kinks, their first two albums, let's face it, they were pretty awful. And for that matter, so were their last 10 albums. And the hell of it is, even taking this into consideration, they were still batting 500, and they've probably recorded more truly great songs than just about any other band you can name. Now that is rock and roll. And this is a reminder, I'm the Wrong Hero, and this is rock and roll A to Z. And we're almost exactly halfway through our presentation, which is appropriate because now we're getting into the bottom half, beginning with perhaps the lowest of the low, the Knack. The Knack. Yeah, they had the knack all right. The knack for making people vicious. Oh, and Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. Now let's see. John Lennon wrote their only memorable hit, Bad to Me, and later he was assassinated outside the Dakota. Paging Oliver Stone. There's got to be some connection here. Jim Kweskin and the Jug Band. Now, I doubt anybody still remembers them, but I do. Now, why on earth did they try to cover Christopher Columbus when the Fats Waller version was still readily available? Oh, and they provided Maria Muldaur with a springboard for her solo career, and that is something that I cannot forgive them for anytime soon. And now we're getting to Leadbelly. Now, strictly speaking, Leadbelly was a blues musician who, in fact, died in the 1940s. But, you know, it's amazing how relevant his songs still are to the modern condition. You know, like, I got a yellow gal I can't keep. You know, I have that problem all the time. Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin. I like to think of them as Beatles who hate. Or perhaps we could consider them as a sophisticated virus which eroded the foundations of rock and roll and continues to do so to this day. Now, when they sang the Battle of Nevermore and they get to the line, breathe air, you know, breathe air, breathe air. Now that's a public service message, otherwise a lot of their ganja-addled fans might have forgotten to do so. And you wouldn't want that now. Now, I suppose I shouldn't put down Led Zeppelin, since they're avowed Satanists and devotees of Aleister Crowley, because the way I'm going to need all the friends I can get. The Left Bank. The Left Bank were sort of the American version of the Zombies, and we all know how famous and well respected the Zombies were. Jerry Lee Lewis. What a genius. Jerry Lee Lewis sends his 13-year-old bride, no, I guess she was actually 12, he was a superstitious man, well, he sent his 13-year-old bride, whatever, down to the corner store in a brand new Cadillac with a $100 bill. And yet, some people had the nerve to call him a comic book reading, unregenerate, evil-doing, whiskey-swilling redneck cracker. Now here's my Jerry Lee Lewis impression. Goodness gracious, great balls on fire. Gordon Lightfoot. Now, after he had that hit about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, he should have followed it up with a song about the wreck of his subsequent career. Lips Incorporated. Funky Town might be one of the most vulgar songs ever written, But from here it looks like Gilbert and Sullivan when you compare it to Boogie Oogie Oogie by A Taste of Honey, or Fly Robin Fly by the Silver Convention, or, for that matter, Afternoon Delight by the Starland Vocal Band. Little feet. I don't care how little their feet were, I still think they stink. Little Richard. Now just think of how different the history of rock and roll might have been if Little Richard had a more dignified name, like Big Dick. Oh, and Love. You know, Love's still around. They play out around here quite frequently. Now, Love, one of their band members went to prison for murdering someone, but they've kept the name Love to this very day. Now, as a marketing strategy, this was probably a move which was light years ahead of its time. Murder somebody? Call ourselves Love. Give to charity? Well, we'll change our name to Hate, I guess. The Lovin' Spoonful. Now, doing the soundtrack to What's Up Tiger Lily was about the peak of the Lovin' Spoonful's career. Then, Zal Yanofsky had to leave the group under mysterious circumstances, a blow from which, apparently, they never recovered. Now, if you want a really good album, try to find Zal Yanofsky's Alive and Well in Argentina. Now, that's a great album for you, one of the funniest albums ever made, yes sir. But enough praise. Now it's time to talk about Leonard Skinner. Leonard Skinner was music for people who were so level-headed they had tobacco juice dribbling out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. Magazine. Well, they were the follow-up band to the Buzzcocks. Whenever I listened to Magazine, I kind of wished I picked up a good book instead. Know what I mean? The Mamas and the Papas. Mama Cass, rumor has it, choked on a sandwich. But it was too late by then. Her death could never atone for songs like Make Your Own Kind of Music, or Creek Alley, for that matter. The MC5. One of my favorite bands. But, you know, a socialist rock band, that could never work because, like I said before, rock and roll is basically capitalism in 145. Oh, and Don McLean. Remember Don McLean? Well, a couple years ago, Don McLean finally reached the apogee of his career. He had a low-fat, fast food hamburger named after him. Oh, and speaking of fast food, Meatloaf. I would do anything for love. Yeah, except maybe learn how to sing on key. Now, Mr. Loaf, as the New York Times refers to you, Mr. Loaf, I would do anything to not have to hear that obnoxious song sung in your evil, grating voice ever again. Okay? Men Without Hats. Well, since they haven't had a hit in so long, maybe they'll change their name to Men Without Careers. Steve Miller. I'm a joker, I'm a smoker, I'm a midnight toker. I sure don't want to hurt no one. Yeah, he sure didn't want to hurt no one. No one but the millions of impressionable teenagers who emulated his hedonistic philosophy without having the benefit of millions in royalties. So, here's to that compassionate molder of youthful minds, Mr. Steve Miller. Roger Miller. Well, you know, he went from doing songs like, songs that even Goober Pyle could understand, like Dang Me, They Ought to Take a Rope and Hang Me, and Chug-a-lug, and Do-wacka-do, and King of the Road. Oh, and then this really great stuff he did, like, you can't roller skate in a buffalo herd, but you can find love if you've a mind to. Oh, and his all-time classic, my uncle used to love me, but he died. Chicken ain't chicken, unless it's looking good fried. Keep on the sunny side. My uncle used to love me, but she died. Well, he went from doing stuff like that to churning out things like, God didn't make little green apples, and it don't rain in Indianapolis in the summertime. Oh, and he had that flop Broadway musical based on Huckleberry Finn, Big River. Now there's a lesson for you. Mark Twain does not translate well into the milieu of pop music. Mr. Mister. Well, here's a message from me to Mr. Mister. Mr. Mister, die, die. Joni Mitchell. Well, Joni Mitchell had an LP called Joni Mitchell Blue. Hey, she said it, not me. Moby Grape. They got their name from the punchline of a bad joke, which is appropriate because after their first album, their career was also a bad joke. Eddie Money. Well, I hate to say it, but it looks like Eddie Money might have to go back to punching a time clock. Or maybe he could team up with Johnny Cash and Johnny Paycheck and go work in a bank or something. The Monkees. Too bad they weren't real monkeys. Maybe they'd still have a job playing Dixieland jazz at a horribly squalid amusement park somewhere in the Midwest. And Michael Nesmith. After he left the Monkees, Michael Nesmith wrote one good song. You know, her name was Joanne. And he continued to manufacture that liquid paper that gums up in the bottle. So you have to shell out a couple more bucks just to buy that even worse smelling stuff that thins up the liquid paper. My question is, why can't they just make the liquid paper so it works the first time, huh? The Moody Blues. Well, if I wrote such pretentiously dope-addled songs, I guess I'd be pretty moody myself. And have you ever heard anything more ludicrous than that twaddle at the end of Nights in White Satin that we're supposed to believe is a poem? You know, breathe deep, the gathering gloom, watch lights fade from every room. Well, now it's time to consider Van Morrison and his band Them. Them. Why would such a great band want to name themselves after a movie about a bunch of giant ants is beyond me. You know, I've often wondered what it would be like if Van Morrison were a detective. Who do you suppose committed the murder? Jackie Wilson said it was Reed Petite. Oh, that clears it up, Van. Thank you for your services. Shadow Morton. I guess he was sort of the poor man's Phil Spector. Well, you know, he was a really famous producer who went from the sublime to the ridiculous. On the one hand, he wrote Walking in the Sand for the Shangri-Las in 15 minutes while waiting for a train. On the other hand, he was responsible for Joan Jett and the Blackhearts and the Runaways. So, sort of balances it out, you know, a little bit. Mock the Hoople. The only hit Mock the Hoople ever had was All the Young Dudes, and David Bowie wrote that for him. And when you have to count on David Bowie to get you into the mainstream, you know you're in pretty bad shape. Mungo Jerry. Here's a guy any girl would be proud to bring home to meet the parents. Folks, I'd like you to meet my boyfriend, Mungo Jerry. How do you do, Mr. Jerry? Please, folks, just call me Mungo. If her daddy's rich, take her out for a spell. If her daddy's poor, just do what you can. Boy, that's really something, huh? Uh-oh, they're coming to take me away. Ha 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 ha. Well, I'll be back shortly. Well, now we come to the Nas. Now here's a riddle for you. Why are Nas albums incredibly rare collector's items, and most Todd Rundgren albums are a dime a dozen? It makes you kind of wonder, huh? Oh, Randy Newman. Now, Randy Newman started his career by writing masterpieces like Davy the Fat Boy and My Old Kentucky Home, and nobody ever heard of him. It's only when he started churning out hack songs like Short People and I Love L.A. that he got popular. Now, seems to me it's no wonder he's so disgusted with everything. But, you know, like I said before, That's the story of rock and roll. And I'll remind you yet again, this is rock and roll A to Z. New Riders of the Purple Sage. Now, these guys make pure Prairie League look like the ne plus ultra of sophistication and wit. The New York Dolls. Now let's face it, Johnny Thunders was Dean Martin with the puke out in the open. Next we come to Harry Nilsson. Now here's a song I composed in honor of the late, great Harry Nilsson. You can jump into the shower, but you'll never be free. No, 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 no. We can make each other soapy. We can make each other soapy. Ow! Ow! Nirvana. I guess you were wondering when I was going to get to a band that actually had a hit single in the 1990s. Well, okay. Submitted for your approval. Nirvana. The lead singer is a former heroin addict and current substance abuser who almost overdosed on sleeping pills and champagne. Now we know the source for those scintillating lyrics of his and the charming way in which he sings them with a throat full of marbles. The Only Ones. Now here's a band you probably haven't heard of. They had that great song, I Want to Die in the Same Place I Was Born, miles from nowhere. Well, it looks like they got their wish. Roy Orbison. Elvis once called Roy Orbison the best singer in the world. So how come there's no Roy Orbison impersonators? Like, a young Roy Orbison, Boy Orbison, only the lonely. His voice cracks on the high notes. Oh well. The Outsiders. Well, I had a roommate who told me that when he was a kid, whenever the song Time Won't Let Me came on the radio, he would transform himself into Time Won't Let Me Man. Rest assured, we evicted him very shortly thereafter. Graham Parker. Now, if this guy's so great as everybody says he is, how's come you never find his records in the cutout bins except for that record that the Rumor put out without him? Could it be the man is so great you get guilt-tripped into buying one of his albums? You listen to it once, you file it, and then you forget all about him? Well, that's certainly been my experience. And now we come to Parliament Funkadelic. P-Funk is basically the musical version of the ideology of the black Muslims. But as far as I'm concerned, they could be Genghis Khan with a backbeat, and I'd still dig them, even as I was being led to my own slaughter by belligerent black militants. Because, you just gotta love Parliament Funkadelic, no matter what. Our Father, who art on Wall Street, hallowed be thy butt. So they could get away with this anti-capitalist jargon because they weren't really a rock band, They were sort of like a funk band, The Partridge Family. I hate the Partridge Family. Especially that little tyrant, Danny Bonaduce, who should have been called Il Bonaduce, if you get my drift. The Peanut Butter Conspiracy. It's too bad that the Peanut Butter Conspiracy never thought to do a version of Jam Up and Jelly Tight. Perubu. Well, I was listening to one of their albums once, and my stepmother asked me if I was on drugs. Now, that's my definition of a truly great rock and roll band. Peter, Paul, and Mary. Now, remember that maddening song, If I Had a Hammer? If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening. Hey, enough with the hammering already. I'm trying to get some sleep. Go hammer on a hammerhead shark. Anything. Just knock off all that hammering. Okay? Ah, Pink Floyd. They should have called themselves Punk Freud. And where do they get off singing "Money is a Crime" when they charge $75 a pop to see their concerts, huh? And Syd Barrett. Now, if Syd Barrett had realized how successful Pink Floyd were going to be, he might have gone crazy a whole lot sooner. And what gets me is, he was the most talented composer in the entire group. I'll tell you, there is no justice. Especially when we consider our next band, The Police. They wrote "Message in a Bottle." Well, here's my message in a bottle. I think I'm going to be sick. Go away, or I'll call the police, the other police, and they'll arrest you for impersonating an officer, except for Sting. They'll arrest him for impersonating a musician. Where aren't the police when you really, really don't need them? Well, now we come to Iggy Pop and the Stooges. I'd like to do my Iggy Pop impression for you, but unfortunately there's no broken glass handy for me to roll around in, so I'll have to pass, I'm afraid. Elvis Presley. What can you say about Elvis Presley that hasn't been said 100 times before? Well, for one thing, at least he had good taste in adult diapers. And now I'd like to do a song the way Elvis should have sang it. Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show. My daddy was in jail, but I didn't want anybody to know. Yeah, Elvis. He got thrown in the army, got hooked on amphetamines, had a nervous breakdown. Oh, but his problems didn't start there. No, I think they started back in the womb when he strangled his own twin brother. Or maybe his career after the army, when he got too fat to wear black leather and pranced around in moronic white jumpsuits. Worst of all, he shook hands with President Nixon. Now, I'm the wrong hero, but what you might not know about me is I'm also an Elvis impersonator. Even though I only have 1 or 2 drugs in my body at any one time, I do Elvis's offstage act. Pissed my pants. I feel a big one coming there. Colonel Parker swindled me out of half of my fortune. Please don't take them diet pills, Mama. I love you just the way you are. Daddy, if I want to throw diamond rings into the front row of the audience, that's my business. Think I'll have me a bacon and peanut butter sandwich on a loaf of Italian bread. Cookie, cookie, the usual. Make it a double. Well, after we discussed Elvis, I can't see where I'm really justified in continuing on with this presentation, and yet I must, because after all, it is called Rock and Roll A to Z, and we're only in the P range. So let us now discuss the Pretenders. Well, whatever it was they were pretending to be, I thank God that that particular charade is over. And now we have Prince. I wonder if Prince is aware of the fact that Wednesday is Prince Spaghetti Day. And the Psychedelic Furs. Gee, I'm sure glad they didn't decide to call themselves something really outrageous that would get you arrested even before you left the store with it. You know, like the Psychedelic Kill the Cops or something like that, you know? Pure Prairie League. You know, I really like those old-timey covers of theirs, you know, because they really evoke the era of cowboys and the Old West. Gee, it's too bad they're from Cincinnati, huh? Oh, and Quicksilver Messenger Service. Well, Quicksilver is mercury, and mercury is poisonous. And, judging from their truncated career, A great many of their would-be fans were aware of this. Now there's a band that ought to be on a double bill with Love. I mean, you know, their guy also got thrown in prison. So, I mean, hell, you know, they could do a Jailbird House Rock or something, I don't know. Question Mark and the Mysterians. Well, I hear they're having a reunion tour, only they're going to jazz up their image a little and go by the name of Exclamation Point and the Hysterians. The Ramones. Maybe they too could update their repertoire. Like, I don't want to be a skinhead no more. I just met a nerd that I could go for. I will say this about the Ramones. They could make government warnings look exciting. Cross at the green, not in between. Hey! The Rascals. Throw the Rascals out. Especially since they wrote songs like How Can I Be Sure? And People Everywhere Just Got to Be Free. Hey, 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 hey. Helen Reddy. Just when you thought you were safe from Helen Reddy, she rises like Freddy Krueger from the graveyard of her well-deserved obscurity, belting out show tunes that even Barbra Streisand would turn her nose up at. Is there no justice in the world? What's that? Helen Reddy doesn't do show tunes? Oh, maybe I'm thinking of Anne Murray. I don't know. So hard to tell them apart, you know. The Red Hot Chili Peppers. My sister likes the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now there's an idea. Name your band after food. I suppose next we can expect to hear from the likes of the Low Fat Mayonnaise. Oh, and the new avant-garde pop group, Horseradish. REM. Well, I'm going to take my time with this one. REM. They had that song a couple years back. Losing My Religion. And I vowed that Peter Buck was going to lose his buck teeth if he ever came around here singing that. Anyway, how's come none of the good bands from Athens, Georgia, you didn't make it, you know? Like the Squalls or Time Toy or Thistle Jane or Asleep Bible Shopping Cart, huh? And what about Pylon? Pylon. 2 albums and then down the crapper. You know, REM has a lot to answer for. And now we have Paul Revere and the Raiders. I think that by dressing up in colonial uniforms, they just might have been taking the British invasion just a little too seriously. They dress up like colonials and then they do a song called Indian Reservation. Go figure. Now the Revillos and the Rezillos. I guess the worst thing about getting old is that I'm constantly confusing the Revillos and the Rezillos. And maybe you all too have the same problem. Well, now here's the difference. The Rezillos did I Love My Baby Because She Does Good Sculptures, yeah! And the Revillos did Bongo Brain, You're Insane. Like I said, I'm sure we all have this problem, so just remember. Rezillos, I Love My Baby Because She Does Good Sculptures, yeah. And Rezillos, Bongo Brain, You're Insane, yeah. Okay, the Righteous Brothers. The only thing righteous about the Righteous Brothers is how righteously sick I am of hearing the song Unchained Melody everywhere I go. I kind of wish it would ascend up to rock and roll heaven, if you get my drift. Johnny Rivers. Well, for the longest time I was afraid of Johnny Rivers because I thought he was some kind of racist, you know, singing about secret Asian man. Secret Asian man? Well, thank God he was only talking about an innocuous spy. You know, for a minute there I thought, whoa, serious stuff. And now we come to the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones. They drowned Brian Jones. The only one of the lot who had any real talent, and they drowned him in a swimming pool. But if he had hung on to Mick Jagger's lips, he could have floated to shore. Hey, it's a known fact that Mick Jagger stole all his dance moves from Tina Turner, and he's still ripping off Brian Jones from beyond the grave. Just listen to Continental Divide. The Pipes of Pan all over again. Brian Jones again. And they drowned him. Oh, and I hear Keith Richards got confused. He had his blood replaced with heroin one day. Isn't that ridiculous? Well, thank you for hanging in there. We're almost to the end of our presentation. About 3/4 of the way through it. And next, let us consider Linda Ronstadt. I'm going to sit back for this one. I got really a lot to get off my chest. And so does she, for that matter. Has this woman ever actually written a song by herself? At last count, she's managed to mangle songs by Carole King, the Everly Brothers, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, Neil Young, Smokey Robinson, Buddy Holly, Roy Orbison, the Rolling Stones, Chuck Berry, the Hollies, and, scraping the bottom of the barrel, Billy Joe Royal. I'll tell you. And now, let's see. I guess our very next artist would in fact be the aforementioned Billy Joe Royal. Now, I recently saw a Best of Billy Joe Royal compilation. Excuse me for saying this, but I don't suppose that one's going to exactly fly out of the record store. Not unless there's a sudden influx of homesick hillbillies with a massive chip on their shoulders. You know, like a down in the boondocks, people put me down, but that's the side of town I was born in. I love her, she loves me, but I don't fit in her society. Lord have mercy on a boy from down in the boondocks. Kind of a catchy song, actually. Well, as long as we're in the R range, and about to pass in, I might add, to the S range, Rush. I say, give them the bums rush, and ship them back to Canada, ASAP. Comprende? And Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels. They did Devil with a Blue Dress On. Now, being as how I'm the wrong hero, that just happens to be my theme song. So don't you say nothing bad about Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels. Now we're in the S range, and I guess it's time to discuss Sam and Dave. Now, don't talk about the Blues Brothers, okay? Because these guys were the Black Brothers, and if I had my way, I would make the Blues Brothers the Black and Blues Brothers for stealing from Sam and Dave. Santana. Has it ever occurred to you if you take out the N and the A, their name spells Satan? Doesn't that tell you something? Oh, Seals and Crofts. You know, the whole reason I wrote this was so I could get a cheap shot in at Seals and Crofts. They had that song, We May Never Pass This Way Again. And you know, I kind of wish they hadn't passed this way the first time. The Sex Pistols. Now, if the Sex Pistols had been right-wingers, they might have had more staying power. But somehow, monarchy in the UK doesn't have quite the same cachet. And judging from the way Johnny Rotten looks, maybe Public Image was smart to perform some of their sets from behind a screen. I mean, you know, if people are going to throw bottles at you anyway, you might as well have a screen there to block them off, you know. And now the Shirelles. They did that Carole King song, Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow? Well, judging from their career, evidently the answer was no. And personally, I think that the song Soldier Boy would have been a lot better if they had called it, oh, I don't know, Solder Boy. Solder Boy, oh my little solder boy, I will glue with you. Simon and Garfunkel. Baldy and the Nerd. What more do you need to say? Oh, and Paul Simon. Paul Simon's going to come out with a new album. It's called Expropriating the Music of People from Around the World More Talented Than Myself. And I guess the title track will be called something like Disgraceland, huh? Frank Sinatra. Well, I guess when old Blue Eyes finally goes to that great gambling casino in the sky, they'll dig him up and reanimate him and call him Frankenstein Sinatra. Huh? What do you think? Sister Sledge. I don't know whether I would rather take a hammer to Sister Sledge or a sledge to MC Hammer. It's a really tough call. Now we have the Small Faces. They were great back when Steve Marriott was fronting the group and they were called the Faces, and they did that song Itchy Coo Park. Then they got that evil Rod Stewart in there and they did Stay With Me, and he didn't. And that was the last you ever heard of him now, wasn't it? Patti Smith. The only hit she ever had was co-written by Bruce Springsteen. Talk about being hard up. Now also, I hear she doesn't shave under her arms. Plus, she married Fred Sonic Smith from the MC5, so she wouldn't have to change her name. Oh, and speaking of Smith, we have the Smiths. The Smiths. Believe me, if I sang as badly and as self-righteously as Morrissey, I would probably record under a pseudonym myself. Actually, come to think of it, I do sing that badly and self-righteously, and I do record under a pseudonym. The Soft Boys. Now the Soft Boys were maybe the best band to come out of England who sounded more than a little like they wanted to be as weird as Syd Barrett. But then they broke up and poor Robin Hitchcock had to try and pretend to be Syd Barrett all by himself, which is really too bad. Oh, Soul Asylum. You know, for the longest time I thought that hit of theirs was about the Civil War. You know, runaway slave, never come back, always riding on a one-way track. You know, the Underground Railroad I thought they were talking about. I actually met Soul Asylum. I was tape recording their set without their permission, and they came up to me and demanded that I give them the tape. And I said, well, I'm a rock critic, and I have to tape record your set. And one of the guys in the band said, or the roadie, I guess, said, well, I was a rock critic, and I never had to tape record any bands. And I felt like saying, yeah, that's why you're a roadie and not a rock critic anymore, right? But anyway, I didn't. And I managed to finally argue them into letting me keep the tape, but they made me swear on a beer bottle to never let anybody listen to it. And to this day, I've never let anybody even listen to the tape. But it's still kicking around somewhere. Sparks. I like to think of Sparks as the missing link between the Kinks and Squeeze. And for that matter, I like to think of Squeeze as the missing link between Sparks and the Eurythmics. The Eurythmics. What are they doing here? This is supposed to be about rock and roll. Phil Spector. I hear they're thinking of making a movie version of Phil Spector's life. Now, what are they going to call it? The Story of a Schizophrenic? Not? I hear the voices. Time for me to leave, but I'll be back and conclude this presentation of Rock and Roll A to Z. Hi, I'm back. Now let's see. We got Bruce Springsteen, produced by John Landau. Sort of like Phil Spector on Percodan. 1,000,000 pianos and all of them boring. I'd like to do an impression for you. Bruce Springsteen singing Born to Run backwards. And now, Bruce Springsteen singing Born to Run forwards. Well, the Standells. The Standells wrote the definitive anthem of Boston rock and roll, Dirty Water. The only thing that spoils it is the fact that they're from Los Angeles. After all, who are they to impugn the quality of our secondary sewage treatment system or the lack thereof? But you can't blame them for not wanting to live here. Boston is a grave, and a shallow one at that. Well, now we come to Edwin Starr, and it's time for another anecdote. When I was in high school, half the kids during lunchtime would listen to Blue Velvet by Bobby Vinton, and the other half would want to listen to War by Edwin Starr. So every lunchtime it was something like this. 1, 2, she wore, what is it good for? Blue velvet, absolutely nothing. Say it again. Wah! You know, every time I do this little routine, I always do it different. In fact, I think every time I do it worse than I did it the first time. But that's neither here nor there. Now we're up to Stars on 45. Now, how many of you have ever bought a Stars on 45 record thinking it was Big Star? I like how they used to be the one-hit wonders Shocking Pink, and how they managed to work their only hit, Venus, into a medley of Beatles songs. Talk about modesty, huh? It's a pity we don't have room for any of the other European bands who made a big splash, like the people that did Yodi-do, 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 Yo-ho-ho. And let's see, oh, there were a bunch of other ones too, you know, like Hooked on a Feeling by Frigid Blue, whatever the hell they were called. Well, anyway, Steely Dan, named after a dildo. How appropriate. Steppenwolf. The name's cool. That's about it. Not even that. They don't even look anything at all like wolves. But I guess they got stepped on a lot, if John Kay's subsequent career is any indication. Cat Stevens. Cat Stevens. He supports the death sentence for Salman Rushdie. I can just hear him, you know, singing, "Peace train rides through the city. Salman Rushdie, kill him." Rod Stewart, a former gravedigger. How appropriate, since his voice sounds like someone who was just dug out of a grave. Did I say that wrong? His voice actually sounds like someone just dug him out of a grave. It's always better to use the active tense, you know, even if his career has been on hiatus for several years. Oh, the Stories, they were Rod Stewart protégés. What a distinction. And how convenient, too, with cerebral lyrics like, Louie, 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 Louie. Sly and the Family Stone. You know, I think Family Affair is probably the best song ever written by a guy who was totally loaded on heroin at the time. One child grows up to be, you know, great song. The Stray Cats. Well, there's a special place in hell reserved for them because, you know, Stray Cat Strut is a great song, but of course it was even greater when Jerry Lee Lewis wrote it back in the 50s and called it Pink Pedal Pushers. Barbra Streisand. She had that song, My name is Barbara. My message? Don't remind me. The Sub Pop label. You know, I'm the wrong hero, and I'm an evil alien from a civilization so advanced that even cavemen could understand it, and I hate Earth music. And that's why, in the privacy of my own home, I listen to records on the Sub Pop label. Because I hate Earth music. Supertramp. I would have liked to have seen them on a bill with Super Gypsies and Super Thieves. Swamp Dogg. Now, Michael Bolton is famous and popular, and Swamp Dogg isn't even on a reputable label. And some people say that there's justice in this world. Go out and buy all the Swamp Dogg records you can possibly find. That's my advice to you. Or else, you must be sacrificed. The Talking Heads. And now this word for Talking Heads laxative. 1 dose and you'll be able to shit out anything. From world beat to bubblegum pop. I hear David Byrne had a baby. Now what's the kid's nickname? Burn Baby Burn? James Taylor. He sings, "Damn this traffic jam, how I hate to be late." Hiroshima, Auschwitz, Bhopal, Dachau, and James Taylor's is upset because he's stuck in a traffic jam. My heart bleeds for you, JT! Whenever I see your smiling face, it puts me in my place because I loathe you. Television. Tom Verlaine, you know. Truly fine band. Not to be confused, however, with television's greatest hits. 10cc. Now it's funny how the only way they could get a hit was to enlist Graham Goldman, the same guy who wrote Bus Stop for the Hollies about 30 years ago. And after that, down the toilet. Yet another band that's named after ejaculate. 10,000 Maniacs. Oh, they were sort of like the Grateful Dead for college sophomores, back from where I sit. The 13th Floor Elevators and Rocky Erickson. Rocky Erickson before in the 1960s and after in the 1980s. There's an object lesson for you. Three Dog Night. Here's a hit by Three Dog Night from my forthcoming musical version of 1984. Just an old-fashioned hate song playing on the telescreen. You know I've waited over 20 years to use that joke? Thunderclap Newman. He had that hit song, There's Something in the Air, which I believe was probably inspired by somebody cutting a fart in the elevator. But don't quote me. And now we come to Pete Townsend. Pete Townsend wrote that song, Let My Love Open the Door. Too bad he didn't think of that at Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati when all those people got crushed. Now, if only those teenagers had thought to crawl into Pete Townsend's nose, they could have hid there for safety. I'm going to invite Pete Townsend to my wedding. Maybe my in-laws will get crushed. Now we come to Throbbing Gristle. Throbbing Gristle. Who could forget their immortal hit, Zyklon B Zombie? Certainly not me. Oh, and Traffic. Somebody should have told them to play In Traffic. Real traffic. Okay? Oh, and Translator. I wish I had a translator who could tell me exactly what Translator's source of appeal precisely was. It would be a most formidable cultural translator. Oh, and T-Rex. You know you're in a cult band when the Rolling Stones ape your style like they did on It's Only Rock and Roll, But I Like It. That's a rule to remember. The Turtles. Turtles are now an endangered species. Maybe it's a backlash, huh? U2. I guess when they learn another chord, they can start calling themselves U3. Now, it's fashionable to despise U2, but I won't let that stop me from doing so anyway. Vanilla Fudge. I guess their name is a lot less controversial than what they were originally going to call themselves, the Vanilla Fucks. But I don't know. The Velvet Underground. Well, their first 4 albums were great, and then came 1969, which was pretty good, and Live at Max's City, well, and then years later there was VU and Another View. Have they scraped the bottom of the barrel yet? What's next? Having fun with the Velvet Underground on stage? Oh, and Lou Reed. Here's my impression of Lou Reed. Hi, I'm Lou Reed. Buy my motorcycle, or I'll run you over. And now we come to the Ventures. I will always be a fan of the Ventures because they autographed my album. Even the drummer, who wasn't even in the band when the album came out. So if you want to ensure the loyalty of your fans, just autograph an album for them, even though you weren't in the band when the album came out. And that's the trick. The Village People. Well, I'd like to borrow a tune from the Kinks to sing my tribute to New York City. I hate the village voice, I hate the village people, I would be very glad to throw them off a steeple. Gene Vincent and the Bottle Caps. Now, Gene Vincent's okay, but what's with calling his backup group the Bottle Caps? Is this what his audience wore on their hats? Bottle caps, like Goober used to have on Andy of Mayberry? I just want to know. The Violent Femmes. Talk about naming yourself after your target audience, huh? And War. They sang, "The world is a ghetto." I say, get out of it and you'll make it that much less of one. Oh, and Dionne Warwick. What's worse? That she has the same name as a decaying mill town in Rhode Island, or that she was involved in an outrageous charity scam, or that she made Burt Bacharach a household name, or maybe it's 3 words. Psychic Friends Network. There's this band called Wah. Wah, aha, and who. The first words an immigrant learns when he comes to this country, huh? Wah, aha, and who. Well, you can certainly express a vast range of emotions with those 3 words. Oh, and speaking of which, now we come to The Who. Now, I bought a copy of Who's Next at a used record store for 25 cents, and I sold it to a deadhead for $25. And I call that a bargain. The best I ever had. And now we come to Jesse Winchester. Jesse Winchester wouldn't fight in Vietnam, and yet he's named after a rifle. How ironic. Oh, and Wild Cherry. Now, with their big 70s hit Play That Funky Music, White Boy, Wild Cherry managed to set back the cause of improved race relations a good 20 years. Oh, I saw them, by the way. They were from around Pittsburgh, you know. Wire. Once again, here's an example of a band that does 3 great albums when nobody's ever heard of them, and then churns out reams and reams of pap once they begin to make a name for themselves. In case I have to remind you, that is the story of rock and roll. They're coming out with an album with Wolfman Jack, and it's called Wolfman Jack Ruins Classic Hits of the 50s. And you get songs like this. Earth Angel, Earth Angel, yeah, listen to the sound of my grating voice. Or, Tears on My Pillow, yeah, it's me again, listen to the sound of my grating voice. And of course, Unchained Melody. Oh, my love, my darling, I hunger. You're hungering for Wolfman Jack, yeah. And dozens more. Well, we're about at the end of our presentation, and now we consider Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder, yes, our young friend who used to write so much. Stevie Wonder. Oh, and X. X, I guess with a name like that, they had a lot of trouble booking rooms at motels, huh? And XTC. Actually, I like XTC. I just threw them in here to beef up the X section. But somebody should have told them that the Big Express was not a great idea. The Yardbirds. You ever hear that song, Over, Under, Sideways, Down? You ever notice how they jazz it up by using the word hey? I think you could do that with any lousy song. When the Red Robin goes bob, bobbing along, hey, along, you know? So at least you learn that trick from the Yardbirds. And now we consider the band Yes. Yes. One word. No. Neil Young. I'm coming out with an ice cream flavor. It's petroleum jelly and rust, and I'm going to call it Neil Young. Neil Young. Bathos, modulated into a twangy wine with banal folk modalities except when it's bathos modulated into an affectless monotone and saturated with yards of feedback. Neil Young. Frank Zappa. Now that Frank Zappa has passed away, we can honor his memory by referring to Al Gore at the PRMC hearing as Vice President Zappa Sucker-Upper. The Zombies. Notice how we started out with Argent and we're ending, or very nearly ending, with the Zombies? Well, the Zombies, they had Tell Her No. Well, Tell Her No is a handy song for dog owners to know when their beloved pet starts to get a little too affectionate. Also, their version of When the Love Light Starts Shining Through Her Eyes is 100 times better than the Supremes' version of the same song. And now we come to our final band in rock and roll A to Z, none other than ZZ Top. ZZ Top. They're bearded, they're filthy, they're cretinous, and they're millionaires. I'm bearded, I'm filthy, and I'm cretinous too. So how's come I'm not a millionaire? Well, in the 10 minutes which remains to this presentation, I'd like to mention every single one of the bands that I couldn't cover due, of course, to time constraints in this presentation of The Wrong Hero, Rock and Roll A to Z. And they are, in rough alphabetical order, Johnny Ace, Adam and the Ants, After the Fire, Asia, The Adlibs, Archie Bell and the Drells, Pat Benatar, B.B. King, Black Sabbath, The Big Bopper, Blue Oyster Cult, Gary U.S. Bonds, Booker T and the MGs, Boston, Joe King Carrasco and the Crowns, the Classics 4, with, of course, their famous hit, Spooky. That's great. You know, a song named after Casper the Friendly Ghost's mischievous friend. The Coasters, Petula Clark, Claudine Clark with Party Lights, you know, the #1 outstanding petulant brat song. Cowboys International. That's a great album, by the way. You see it in the cutout bins all the time. The Crystals, Johnny Symbol, Culture Club, Bobby Darin, Depeche Mode, Del Vikings, Dr. Hook, The Diamonds, you know, with Little Darling, where they wear a napkin over their head. Danny and the Juniors, the Spencer Davis Group, Dion, the English Beat, Echo and the Bunnymen, Edison Lighthouse. My cousin was in the Navy with one of them. That's why I threw him in there. Earth, Wind and Fire, The Fifth Dimension, Roberta Flack, Fabian, Falco, The Fugs, The Four Tops, Peter Frampton, the Bobby Fuller Four, Jay Giles, Marvin Gaye, Gang of Four, the Barry Goldberg reunion, who had that great song by Danny Whitten, Got a Hole in My Pocket, Greenbaum, Norman Greenbaum, you know, Spirit in the Sky, ba 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 ba. Golden Earring, the Golden Palominos, who are like a spin-off of the Feelies, but we managed to cover the Feelies. Green on Red, and they had that song, well, there ain't no free lunch today. I'll buy you a steak, but I'll take it from your pay. Michael Hurley, the Holy Modal Rounders. Do you like boobs a lot? Yes, I like boobs a lot. Al Green, the Guess Who, Harper's Bazaar, Richie Havens, Bo Donaldson, and the Haywoods. I wouldn't want to forget them because, you know, they had that great song, Billy, Don't Be a Hero. And of course, you know, that's sort of one of my theme songs. Iron Butterfly, Tommy James and the Shondells. We'll talk about psychedelic, Toe in the Line, Toe in the Line. Tom Jones, Loggins and Messina, Your Mama Don't Dance and Your Daddy Don't Rock and Roll, and neither do we either. Kiss, who, you know, I think were better when they wore the makeup. I think a lot of people agree, too. In fact, that was their only rationale, was that they wore this weird makeup. Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, who were better when they were Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, and when they became just plain LaBelle, well, they weren't so good. Let's put it that way. I interviewed Patti LaBelle, and the first question I asked her was, how's come you do all those lousy cover versions? Does your record company make you do them? And she said, oh no, that was our decision. Oh, well, talk about Mr. Faux Pas here. The Leaves, who had the original version of Hey Joe, for which they can never be forgiven. The Lemonheads, who have inspired, you know, like these incredible, you know, stalkers and stuff like that. I mean, people really hate the Lemonheads for some reason. Well, I can understand why. But anyway, Kraftwerk, the Music Explosion with a little bit of soul, the McCoys, who had that song Hang On Sloopy, which a lot of people thought was Hang On Snoopy, which is probably why the song got to be so successful. Also, a young Rick Derringer was in the band, and Jimi Hendrix let it be known that, in fact, the McCoys were his favorite band because of the guitar solo on Hang On Sloopy. Madonna. Let's not forget Mission of Burma. I'm on the edge of Burma, I'm on the edge of Burma. Mickey and Sylvia. Not to be confused with Sylvia Tyson, by the way. Melissa Manchester. Manfred Mann. The Minutemen. Mountain. I told you this was in rough alphabetical order. Barry Manilow. Melanie. Benny Mardones. Remember him? More Than a Feeling. Let's see. Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. Who were the Vandellas? Were they like female vandals or something? I never did figure that out. The Merry-Go-Round. How's come there was never a band called The Clowns, you know? Let's see. New Order. Oh, I guess that would have been covered by the Charlatans. Well, anyway, New Order, NRBQ, Maxine Nightingale, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, who were always referred to as OMD because no rock fan living could spell the word maneuvers. The Ohio Players, whose fetishistic covers set a new low in standards for rock and roll covers. Mike Oldfield, whose Tubular Bells I wish had never existed because, you know, if I ever get tinnitus, I'll probably hear Tubular Bells. Do-do-do-do-do. The Osmonds, Olivia Newton-John, Billy Preston, Paper Lace, Peaches and Herb, Pylon, Wilson Pickett, Gene Pitney, Frida Payne, Poco, Pavement, who threatened to sue me because I videotaped one of their shows. Even though they gave me permission, they said, well, when we get famous, we're going to sue you. Oh, that's great, huh? That's how to make friends. Prefab Sprout, Red Crayola, Roxy Music, the Ronettes, Romeo Void, the Rubinus, Queen. I really, really regret not having time to talk about Queen. We Are the Champions? Oh boy, you sure are. The champions of what I won't say, okay? Just in the interests of political correctness. The Raspberries, Tommy Rowe, the Royal Counts. The Royal Counts are the greatest doo-wop band alive. Oh, I'm not even sure they're alive anymore. Go to Cheapo Records, though. They'll sell you a copy of The Royal Counts Sing A Cappella Soul, Volume 2, which is one of the greatest records ever made. Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, Boz Scaggs. Now, here's another guy you want to take home to meet your parents, you know. Oh, I'd like you to meet Mr. Skaggs. Oh, you can call me Boz, you know. Huh, great, huh? Let's see, who else? Leo Sayer, Savoy Brown, Savage Republic, The Shadows of Night, Bobby Sherman, Carly Simon, Spandau Ballet, Steeler's Wheel, Spinners, Spiral Jetty, Spirit, Steel Eye Span, The Sweet, Dusty Springfield, The Searchers, Bob Seger, Del Shannon, Phoebe Snow, Sonny and Cher, Donna Summer, The Supremes, The 3 O'Clock, Tin Huey, The Tubes, The Temptations, Thin Lizzy, The Tremolos. Oh, I don't think I got the Bizarros either, come to think of it. Ike and Tina Turner, Conway Twitty, The Trogs, Ultravox, Uriah Heep, Bobby V, The Wee Five, Ian Whitcomb. Ian Whitcomb, you remember his like big hook. Barry White, you know, Barry White, the guy without whom the 70s would have never happened. Booker White, oh, the old gray mare. 20 minutes worth, you know, the most long-winded blues musician who ever lived. Well, but still, good stuff. Loudon Wainwright III. Now, how does a guy with a name like Loudon Wainwright III, such an aristocratic name, and he comes out with a song called Dead Skunk in the Middle of the Road? Well, anyway, Edgar Winter. Now, who could forget Frankenstein? Oh, I'd love to forget it, but I can't. Joe Walsh, Mary Wells. Now, you ever notice on My Guy, her voice cracks? You know, it's like, as a matter of opinion, I think he's tops. My opinion is he's the cream of the crop. I don't know how she gets away with that, but she does. Jackie Wilson, Sheb Woolley, Brenton Wood, Link, he's the guy that Oogum, boogum, 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 come now, baby, casting your spell on me. Link Ray, Reckless Eric. I wanted to get Reckless Eric in there, but I couldn't. I'm so sorry, too. Gary Wright. You know, oh, Dreamweaver, I stole the premise and the hook from this song from John Lennon. Hey. Yola Tango, Yellow Balloon. Who could forget their immortal hit, It's Like a Yellow Balloon on a Lazy Afternoon? Timmy Yoro, Jesse Colin Young, and of course, the Youngbloods, and Yellow, John Zackerly, Zager and Evans, Pia Zadora, Warren Zevon, and finally, of all the bands that were outtakes from this presentation of Rock and Roll A to Z, I most regret not being able to deal with Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs with their immortal classic, Oh, won't you stay just a little bit longer? Well, that's my cue to tell you that I can't stay even a second longer because I'm out of time, but it has been a great deal of fun discussing rock and roll from A to Z, and I hope to do this again at some other time, but I don't think it'll be anytime soon because I think my voice is shot. So this is the Wrong Hero wishing you good night.